Parenthood. For some, it represents the culmination of one's journey into maturity and has pleasing and meaningful associations with their own families, with memories of celebrations and shared joys, and all the other happy associations embodied by the word home. For many, it marks their largest and most important step into the continued project of the human race. But for others, it can represent a loss of autonomy, inhibitions on the possibilities for one's own life, and a heavy set of unwanted responsibilities. Either way, it is not generally considered to be a source of terror and existential dread. However, if you watch the 2019 film Vivarium, you may have to readjust your opinions on that. Our story begins with a young couple, Jimma and her husband Tom, who one fine day take a fateful trip to a real estate office to see about purchasing a home. Jimma is an elementary school teacher and Tom is a groundskeeper. In their first scene, they share some of their desires for the future, Tom looking forward to the growth of his business and the day when he'll be able to transport his tools in a truck of his own, rather than having to commandeer the trunk of Jimma's little Volkswagen. At the real estate office, they meet Martin.
Jimma and Tom. Lovely to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you too, Martin.
Who glowingly, if a bit oddly, describes a new housing development called Yonder. He ultimately persuades them to follow him to this strangely immaculate development on the outskirts of town and shows them through a house in his unusual manner.
Oh. The living room. A room to live in.
But after they've been there for a few minutes, Martin disappears. Jimma and Tom shrug and get in their car to leave, but as they drive, the neighborhood seems to expand and contort so that no matter what route they take, they always return to the house that Martin had showed them, unit number 9. Eventually, the couple discovers that they are trapped in this suburban purgatory. The houses extend endlessly in every direction, and no matter where they turn or how many yards they pass through, they always end up back at their assigned unit number 9. Finally, in desperation, Tom sets fire to the house, and the couple fall asleep on the sidewalk as they watch it burn down. As the sun rises on the following morning, however, the couple sees through the lingering ashes that the house has been completely restored, and sitting on the street in front of it, they discover a cardboard box with a newborn baby inside. Written on the inner flap of the box is the command, "Raise the child and be released." One of my favorite things about horror as a genre is its ability to make the familiar strange and even threatening. And if it can hold a candle up to certain relevant cultural anxieties at the same time, so much the better. In truth, we are surrounded by miniature nightmares, but we so rarely take notice. Vivarium begins with one such nightmare, a scene of a cuckoo bird invading another bird's nest. The audience watches as the cuckoo hatchling, much larger than its siblings, pushes the other birds out of the nest, sending them falling to their deaths. The scene ends with a nearly full-grown cuckoo being fed by its adoptive mother. The difference in their species is massive, and there's something deeply unsettling about the image. The cuckoo dwarfs the mother bird, its mouth opened into this monstrous gaping maw, and when the mother puts the food that she had brought into its mouth, you can almost imagine that it is about to devour her instead of the little morsel. The most unnerving thing is that the mother cannot seem to see what is so obvious to us, that her child cannot possibly be her child, that something alien has invaded her nest, and that this monstrous parasite that has conned her into feeding it has also murdered her children. From a certain angle, if you try to eliminate the distance and put a human face on this scenario, the horror is almost too great to grasp. In the suburban purgatory where Tom and Jimma have been trapped, everything is perfectly pleasing visually, but this only masks the fact that there is something deeply wrong. It is totally joyless. The food has no taste, and aside from their car radio, there is no music. There are no neighbors, no signs of human life. The entire environment is totally without soul, and even the act of parenthood, something which is, yes, often very difficult, but which is supposed to be filled with joy and fulfillment, is polluted by the alienness of the child-shaped thing, aptly described by Tom as a creepy mutant, that the couple have been forced to raise. It looks like a boy, but everything from the speed of its growth to its bizarre mimicry of Jimma and Tom's actions and vocal expressions.
Yeah, well maybe, Jimma, if you didn't say no to every other goddamn house we looked at, we wouldn't have ended up here. So I'm to blame?
To the way that it wakes them every morning with ear-piercing shrieks. is an unsettling and uncanny exaggeration of the normal traits of newborns and children. It is human, but also alien, and the core conflict between Jimma and Tom comes from Jimma's creeping desire to embrace her role as this thing's mother, to empathize with it. Both Tom and Jimma had wanted a house because they dreamed of raising children of their own, of creating some place that they could call home, in that special, quasi-mystical way in which we think of the places where we grew up. And over the course of the film, Jimma is slowly tempted to accept this simulacrum of the life that she had wanted. In small ways, she starts to buy into the illusion, even when Tom keeps reminding her that this thing that forces their care with the ear-shattering screams that it emits whenever it has not gotten its way, this thing is not a child, and she should not be playing mother to it. And to the film's credit, it never makes Jimma look insane for doing this. We understand the small ways in which she gives in, and if we're honest, can easily imagine making similar concessions ourselves. It is horrific. But there is something inside of all of us that tries to soften even the most horrific circumstances by making the best of them. We try to adjust, to acclimate, to accept what is even when we shouldn't. This is nowhere as clear as it becomes after Tom has begun to dig. One day, after smoking down the remnants of one of his few remaining cigarettes, Tom flicks the smoldering butt at the child, a small token of his hatred and resentment for the creepy mutant. It bounces off the boy, who barely takes notice, but when it lands, it scorches the yard in a way that suggests that what they are standing on isn't actually grass or dirt. Tom cracks the surface with his pickaxe and finds that beneath the turf is a strange yellow clay-like substance. He retrieves more of his tools from the car and begins to dig. Who really knows why or what he hopes to accomplish by this? Does he truly expect that somewhere beneath the soil he'll find their deliverance? Probably not. It's probably, as he says to Jimma when she tries to pull him away, just something he can do, a form of therapy. Whatever the reason, he continues digging all day, and then the next day, and the day after that. One morning, Jimma tries to make small talk with him about his plans.
Are you gonna dig today?
Yeah, I guess.
Do you feel like you're making progress?
He doesn't answer her. It's not a great question. It puts Tom in the uncomfortable position of having to admit that progress isn't really the point. He's digging for psychological reasons, not logical ones. Having to answer a question like this forces him to admit that, however briefly to himself. At the same time, though, it's hard to fault Jimma. She's just trying to be nice, trying to have a moment of pleasant normalcy inside all of this madness. But Tom refuses to play along. He gives her a look that kind of says, "What the fuck are you talking about?" and then excuses himself from the table. Tom differs from Jimma in that he never indulges this impulse to conform to the situation. Each of them represents a fundamentally different philosophy for dealing with struggle. Jimma is a nurturer and an optimist. She looks for ways to make whatever adjustments she can in order to cope with her situation and to bring joy to others. And her gift is her ability to find pleasure or joy in unlikely places, like the brief, playful overtures that she makes to Tom as they brush their teeth together in the morning. Tom, on the other hand, is a fighter. He never sees himself as anything but a prisoner in this place, and he is at war for almost every waking moment that he remains here. His frustration with his wife is that he cannot get her to take the same combative stance that he does. Outside, their different approaches might have complemented one another, each making up for what the other lacked, but here, in this situation, their differences set them at odds, even as they try to stay on the same team. This place, this situation, is a crucible for each of their personalities. Someone has to be right, and someone has to be wrong. Tom becomes increasingly hostile to the child creature, and eventually he locks it in the car, intent on ignoring its screams and leaving it there until it starves to death or the other mutants come for it. Whatever happens, he's not going to do this job.
Okay, you will leave it there. Don't play with it. Don't feed it. Don't have anything to do with it. You will let it starve.
Let me up!
Look, it has you acting like you're its f***ing mother. Okay, you're putting it to bed.
But in the end, Jimma can't go along with the plan. Even though she knows intellectually that this thing isn't her child, isn't really even a child in some important sense, she can't help but to empathize with it. And this means that she can't just let it die. She lets the boy out of the car and then begins to put a more earnest effort into being its mother. It's at this point that Tom begins sleeping in the hole that he's dug. There's still no indication that what he's doing has much chance of leading to their escape, but his choosing to stay there illustrates his growing estrangement from his wife and his refusal to accept the false reality that they have been presented with. When given the choice between the soft bed that conceals his imprisonment and the dirty hole that reinforces it, he chooses reality. Jimma, on the other hand, chooses to embrace her role as surrogate mother. She attempts to ignore the boy's odd behaviors. She tries to nurture him, and eventually, she even stops correcting him when he calls her mother. One day, after disappearing for a time, the boy shows up with a book filled with inexplicable hieroglyphs, diagrams, and mazes that are reminiscent of the images that the boy watches on the TV screen. Jimma's experiment with earnest motherhood ends when she attempts to discover where the boy found the book. He tells her that during the day, when he was solving a mystery, he met someone new, but that he isn't allowed to tell her about this person. Jimma, no stranger to dealing with children, cleverly uses the pretense of a game to get the information out of the boy.
Let's play pretend.
Pretend to be me.
Whatever.
Convincing him to give an imitation of this new person.
Is there anyone else you can do? Someone you met today? Pretend to be that person.
The result is terrifying. Jimma is finally presented with irrefutable evidence of this creature's alienness, but by then it is too late. What is it that makes Tom and Jimma's situation so horrifying? In one sense, the answer is extremely obvious. It is the fact that they cannot escape and that the child they have to raise is clearly not human, but I think that there's more to it than that. I think that what makes the uncanny horror of Vivarium work is that the world in which Tom and Jimma find themselves provides them with a hollow facsimile of the things that they, and what we, desire in our own lives. The home in which they live is indeed fairly beautiful, and the kind of place that many people would be very happy to live in. But as with so many things in this uncanny suburbia, it lacks some organically human element that seems impossible to define, even as it reminds us of our own world in certain ways. Jimma and Tom have no neighbors, but in some way this mirrors the reality that Americans today have little or no relationship with their neighbors. And they are raising a child that, though he is learning certain things from them, is fundamentally disconnected from their goals and their desires. There's this scene in Stranger Things when Hopper is talking about how he and Elle grew apart, and he gives this line about how we have to reject our fathers so that we can become something new. I don't know when it happened or how, but at some point the belief in this idea became the dominant feature of what a good parent is. A good parent is the one who doesn't impose their beliefs or values onto their children. They just give them the things they need so that they can become something new. It's no surprise that a message like this would appeal to young people. It's a little more surprising that parents should have bought into this idea with such eagerness, but they have. Most right-thinking parents today believe that the future belongs to their children, and that they really have very little say in what the kids choose to do with this future. In numerous ways, parents even seem to defer to the wisdom of the young, aping their styles and trying to keep up with their trends. They no longer feel as much confidence about what to teach their kids, or even how to parent them. Recent Pew data reveals that parents don't even have a strong grasp on what they want for their kids. Aside from professional goals, wanting their children to enjoy their work and be able to support themselves, parents don't even seem to feel all that strongly about whether their children have children of their own. Another Pew survey indicated that only a minority of parents cared strongly about their children sharing their religious or political beliefs. Taken together, this data indicates that parents have become less confident that they really have any right to assert their own vision of life onto their children. They don't even have enough confidence in their decision to have children to strongly want for those kids to have children of their own. As previously stated, most up-to-date parents today believe that their children have a right to self-determination. In fact, many parents look to their children to help them keep pace with the changing social landscape, but lurking in the background there is always this question for the parent: will it go too far? Whatever too far may mean is a matter of individual taste or belief, and will differ for most everyone, but it is the fact of there being a limit that matters. Most parents, if asked about the limit, would probably say something like, "I would hope that I've raised them not to do those things that I disagree with, but ultimately you have to accept that they are the future." A futile complaint that cannot even be squared with other commitments to individualism. In the end, parents are entirely helpless to prevent the future from happening to their children, whose interests and tastes may be as bizarre to them as the incomprehensible visions that the boy in the movie witnesses on the TV screen. This is surprisingly apt because in refusing to impose their beliefs on their children, parents resign themselves to allowing the culture industry to impose other beliefs on them. We tend to brush right over this kind of stuff when it comes to our attention, but is this just because we're too scared to really think very deeply about it? After all, if you don't really care about whether or not your kids have children, if it's not important to you that they follow your values and your beliefs, then it sort of begs the question, why did you have them then? For more and more people today, there isn't a good answer to that question. It's no secret that birth rates across the developed world are collapsing. One of the most frequently cited explanations given for this is that people simply can't afford to have kids today, and despite everything that I am about to say, I am very sympathetic to the people who feel this. But this explanation falls apart upon closer inspection, especially when viewed from a historical perspective or a global one. America may have serious economic problems, obvious to everyone save the exceptionally special people who think GDP tells the entire story, but most of the countries that are having the most trouble reproducing their populations have a higher quality of living than 99.9% of every human that has ever lived. This theory is further disproven by the fact that most of the countries that don't have this problem are all dramatically poorer. The country with the highest current birth rate is the Niger, with an average of about 6 children per woman. The GDP per capita there is $545. Compare that to the US, where the GDP per capita is just under $63,000. And the birth rate is 1.66 children per woman. This same trend is seen internally as well, with birth rates steadily decreasing as one moves up across income brackets in the United States. Add to this the fact that your ancestors almost certainly lived on far less than you do currently. Until she died, my grandmother never tired of telling me about the Great Depression and the day when her family went to the grocery store and her father held up a dime, the last of all the money that they had in the world, and he asked his wife if they should spend it on milk or bread. The economic struggles that many people experience today are real and demand serious attention, but they are simply not on the same level as having to feed your family on $2 when you don't know when you will get another chance. So just on the facts, the idea that significant numbers of people in the developed world truly cannot afford to have children doesn't hold water. There's something deeper going on here, and it's the same thing that leads to the horror of Vivarium. And whatever that something deeper is, the end result is that fewer and fewer people are seeing children as a choice that makes sense for them. Maybe this is because the incentives have gone wrong. In the past, having children meant the continuation of some kind of legacy. It could have been a culture, a faith, a shared commitment to a certain vision of the good life and what it meant to be human. At different points in history, having children was literally an economic benefit, bodies that could be put to work when they got old enough. Or they might represent the possibility of having someone to take care of you in your old age. If nothing else, the family unit was an alternative to and escape from the outer world of society where all human relations were essentially contingent and could be dissolved instantly as soon as one party no longer desired to maintain them. In contrast to this, the family was the one place where these bonds were meant to be unbreakable, for better or for worse. The old saying, "you can't choose family," was meant to indicate that your commitment to these people was not a matter of how much you liked their company. But regardless of the fact that I chose to list these things out like a dork, most people throughout time didn't have kids for any of these reasons. They had them simply because that's what you did. Up until the development of effective contraception in the 20th century, people really had very little say in the matter. Parents make enormous sacrifices for their children, but the investment behind those sacrifices used to be clear. Someone to take care of you in your twilight years, someone to carry on your legacy and your vision of the good, the sense of being part of the continuation of the grand project of the human race. But today, all of these bonds have been weakened, and there is far less agreement or certainty on what this project is or what it should look like in the future. The world, in the meantime, continues to become stranger and stranger. The digital realm, once thought to be a supplement to normal social relationships that would allow for greater amounts of real-world social community, now appears to have been hostile to such real-world communities from the start. There is a massive rift emerging between the sexes with no indication of what it would take to heal it, and both sides becoming increasingly radical and alienated from the other. Both religion and community engagement are in freefall. The wealth gap has never been larger, and AI, the threat of 1,000 sci-fi stories, is being developed at breakneck speeds. There is a feeling harder and harder to ignore for any reasonably aware person that the future may not be in our control, and that we are being carried towards it without any possibility of changing our destination. With all of this, is it really surprising that parents seem to have so little conviction when it comes to what they want for their kids? Essentially, it just boils down to having friends and a good job. The great irony of our historical moment is that the Western Enlightenment project, which began with Socrates asserting that contemplation of the good was the most important task for humanity, ends with a civilizational shrug and a capitulation to the whims of history. And behind this vacant positivity, there is the lurking anxiety that it's actually irrelevant, that whether you have children or not, all that matters is that society keeps on trucking, though who knows where it's headed. Maybe your kids will have kids, maybe their kids will have kids, but eventually your line is probably going to die off, and then what was it for? What was the point of the sacrifices that you made, the life that you might have lived but didn't? Without some grand vision, without the confidence to believe that it should reproduce itself, cultures and societies will begin to doubt the goodness of reproduction.
Is the meaning of life to work and pay taxes and then die?
Lovely to meet you.
The relationship between parents and their children grows colder, more cynical. Modern parental relationships with their children are still, in large part, as loving and generous as they ever have been, but they are haunted by the suspicion that they are simply training their replacements. This sentiment is captured in the moment when Jimma is dying and the mutant calls her mother once again.
What am I in this?
You are a mother. Someone who prepares her son for the world.
What does a mother do then?
She dies.
And of course, preparing her child for the world is exactly what Jimma has done. Not only did she feed it, but she and Tom both gave it a basic understanding of the language, habits, and psychology of humans, all tools which have prepared it to go on to do its own grim work of trapping and enslaving other happy couples to do the same thing. This represents the ultimate formulation of this gutted idea of parenthood. There is nothing human in this formulation, no passion, no depth, simply the remorseless working out of a cold logic. Jimma dies and the young man zips up her bag and unceremoniously dumps her into the hole that Tom died digging. The same hole where he earlier had deposited Tom's body. After this, he fills in the grave and leaves the maze neighborhood, driving to the real estate office where we once again see Martin, this time profoundly aged and in the process of dying in his chair. The mutant takes Martin's name pen, puts him in a bag and disposes of his body. He then takes a seat at the desk and we watch as a pair of new victims enters the office.
It's just a complicated game. Yeah.
The Martins themselves can be understood as a metaphor for a kind of anti-human humanity produced by corporate HR departments. Everything about him is a facsimile of some human trait but missing the inner spirit. He's the perfect incarnation of the impish, cringing doppelgangers that everyone attempts to sell themselves as on LinkedIn. Martin is the perfect worker. He's never had an unapproved opinion. He's never made an off-color joke or an inappropriate comment. He in fact seems to have no existence outside of his job. He literally lives for it, and he is so utterly replaceable that when his replacement arrives to callously stuff his corpse into a waste container, it is not even necessary to get a new name tag. His lifespan is short, and when he dies, he is simply disposed of, leaving no trace, and his body is so insubstantial that he can be rolled up and stuffed in a normal-sized drawer. The irony of the Martins is that they cannot reproduce themselves. Their life cycle is parasitic, requiring continual duping of naive innocents like Jimma and Tom. And just before Tom's death, the couple had reminisced about how they'd met and how they just wanted to make a home.
Kind of felt like I was home because of you. I'm home right now.
And how this simple desire was somehow baked into their love for each other. It was this desire that the Martins took advantage of, providing a cruel imitation devoid of passion or joy. And that's pretty bad, but what's worse is that apparently, to them, that should have been enough. Art allows us to celebrate beauty, to commemorate our loves and express our ideals, but it also allows us to give voice to our fears and anxieties, especially when those anxieties are lurking just past the boundaries of conscious thought. And often, the value of horror stories is that they can give us a chance to grapple with these fears by presenting them to us in a more concrete, albeit distorted form. Such is the case with Vivarium, which explores the dark side of modern isolation and alienation and seems to ask whether, even as our worlds become safer and cleaner and more perfect, we have lost track of something that we should not have lost track of, and whether we have let in something that we should not have let in. To return one last time to the film's opening, after the titles, a scene plays in which one of Jimma's students stumbles across one of the baby birds which has been pushed from the nest by the cuckoo. The girl asks who killed the baby birds, and Jimma answers that it might have been a cuckoo who needed a nest. The girl asks why it didn't just build one of its own. That's nature, Jimma answers. That's just the way things are. I don't like the way things are, the child answers back. It's horrible. But in the end, Vivarium sheds less light on the tyrannies of nature than it does to reveal the shortcomings of the structures and beliefs that are of our own design. After all, the Martins aren't any aspect of our natural world. Rather, they are creations of our own cultural psyches, and yonder is a manifestation of hidden anxieties where home is a prison and food has no taste, and our children are citizens of a future that we cannot understand and which has no regard for us as human beings.